In a harsh frontier town, three sisters held tight, their father's betrayal a wound deeper than any blade. He sold them for coins, their futures traded like goods. Yet a stranger, scarred by her own grief, saw their fear and offered salvation. This story weaves pain, hope, and love rising from despair. It is a journey of heart's healing and a family forged anew. Listen close, feel their story unfold. You are watching Ember Stories. Stay with us. The wind tore through Coldwater, Nebraska in the autumn of 1892, flinging dust and a faint whiff of sorrow across the prairie. Coldwater was a place of weathered boards and weathered souls, where the land stretched vast and unforgiving. In a leaning cabin on the town's edge, three sisters sat close to a fire that gave more smoke than warmth. Eliza, 16, had eyes sharp as a blade, always watching. Mary, 12, wore freckles like a map of quiet strength. Clara, 7, hugged her rag doll, its stitches fraying like the hope in the room. Their father, Amos Crane, slumped at a table, his hands wrapped around a whiskey bottle and a crumpled letter. His face was a ruin of hard years, dreams long buried under barren soil. Once he had tilled the land with hope, but drought and loss had soured him. "It is settled," he muttered, his voice rough as gravel. "You will have a new life. Better than this hole." The words landed heavy, each one a bruise. Eliza stood, her fists tight. "What do you mean, Father?" Her voice shook, but defiance burned beneath it. She had always been the one to challenge him, to face his storms. Mary pulled Clara closer, the younger girl's eyes wide with fear, her doll pressed tight. The air felt thick, charged with something wrong. Amos barely looked up, his gaze fixed on the letter. "Men want wives, good men. They will pay, and you will go to them." He spoke as if trading old tools, not daughters. The letter listed their fates: Eliza to a rancher in Wyoming, Mary to a Colorado miner, Clara to a Kansas widower who needed a caretaker more than a bride. The sisters were to be mail-order brides, their lives sold for a handful of coins. "You cannot do this," Eliza said, her heart hammering. "We are your daughters." Amos turned away, his silence colder than, the wind rattling the cabin's thin walls. They had seen him barter before. Livestock, their mother's locket after fever took her 3 winters ago, but this cut deeper. This was their very selves. The fire snapped, spitting embers that died on the floor. Eliza looked at Mary, whose lips trembled as she whispered to Clara, trying to shield her from the truth. Clara's doll dangled, its button eyes blank as the future they faced. Eliza's mind raced, searching for a way out, but the weight of Amos's decision pressed down like a stone. The sisters were to be torn apart, sent to strangers in far-off places. Beyond the cabin, Coldwater stirred with the arrival of a stranger. Abigail Harrow, 35, stepped off a creaking wagon, her hair like ripe wheat under a worn bonnet, her eyes carrying a storm of their own. She traveled with a horse named Juniper, her only companion through years of loss, a husband to war, a child to sickness, a home to flames. Abigail moved through the world like a ghost, never staying long enough for grief to catch her. In the saloon, where men nursed drinks and grudges, Abigail overheard talk of Amos Crane's plan. The barkeep, his face creased like old hide, shook his head. "Poor girls," he said. "Crane's selling them off like cattle." Abigail's hands tightened on her cup. She knew betrayal, knew what it was to be cast aside. Something fierce woke in her, a spark she had not felt in years. That night, as the sisters lay awake, Eliza plotting, Mary praying, Clara clutching her doll, Abigail stood outside their cabin. The wind tugged at her shawl, and the stars burned, cold above. She did not know what she could offer, only that she could not turn away. The sisters' fear called to her, a mirror of her own past. She took a step closer, her boots crunching on the frost-kissed ground, her heart set on a purpose she could not yet name. The night deepened around the Crane cabin, the wind clawing at the walls like a living thing. Inside, Eliza lay awake, her sisters breathing uneven beside her. Clara's doll rested between them, a small, tattered sentinel. Eliza's mind churned, piecing together fragments of a plan. Run to the next town, hide in the church, beg the preacher for sanctuary. But Coldwater was a speck in the vast Nebraska prairie, and the world beyond felt as distant as the moon. She glanced at Mary, whose eyes gleamed in the dark, wide with the same fear. "We will stay together," Eliza whispered. Mary nodded, her hand finding Clara's. Outside, Abigail Harrow lingered, her breath clouding in the chill. She had no clear path, only a pull in her chest, sharp as a hook. The saloon's talk had painted a grim picture. Amos Crane, drowning in debt and drink, trading his daughters to men he had never met. Abigail knew men like that. Hard men, shaped by the frontier's cruelty, who saw wives as labor, not love. She thought of her own daughter, lost to fever at Clara's age, and the ache flared fresh. She could not save her own, but these girls, she might yet. Morning broke gray and cold, the sky heavy with the promise of early snow. Amos was gone before dawn, likely to the saloon to seal his deal with a middleman who carried letters to the men waiting for their brides. The sisters rose, their movements slow, as if the air itself weighed them down. Eliza boiled water for thin porridge, her hands steady despite the storm in her heart. Mary braided Clara's hair, humming a hymn their mother once sang. Clara clutched her doll, asking, "Will we go far away, Liza?" Eliza forced a smile. "Not if I can help it." Abigail appeared at their door mid-morning, her shawl wrapped tight against the wind. She knocked, the sound sharp in the quiet. Eliza opened the door, her eyes narrowing at the stranger. Abigail's face was kind but worn, like a book read too many times. "I am Abigail Harrow," she said, her voice steady. "I heard about your father's plan. I want to help." Eliza hesitated, her instinct to protect her sisters warring with a flicker of hope. Strangers did not offer help in cold water, not without a price. "Why would you care?" she asked, her tone sharp. Abigail met her gaze, unflinching. "Because I know what it is to lose everything, and I see you three holding on to each other. That is worth saving." Mary stepped forward, Clara peeking from behind her. "Can you stop him?" Mary asked, her voice small but clear. Abigail knelt to their level, her eyes softening. "I will try, but I need you to trust me." Clara tilted her head, studying Abigail. "Do you have a doll?" she asked, holding up her own. Abigail smiled, a crack in her guarded face. "I did, once. A girl like you gave it a name." Clara nodded, satisfied, as if that settled things. Abigail's plan was simple but bold. Confront Amos, offer to buy the girl's freedom. She had little money, scraped from years of odd work, but it might be enough to sway a man like Amos, whose loyalty lay with whiskey and coin. She told the sisters to stay put, to act as if nothing had changed. "He must not know I am here for you," she said. "Not yet." Eliza nodded, her jaw tight. She did not trust easily, but something in Abigail's eyes, grief, resolve, a mirror of her own fight, made her believe. The day dragged, each hour heavy with waiting. Amos returned at dusk, his steps uneven, the letter gone. He slumped at the table, muttering about arrangements made, men coming soon to claim his daughters. Eliza's stomach twisted, but she kept her face blank, stirring a pot of watery stew. Mary read to Clara from a worn Bible, her voice steady despite the fear beneath. The sisters played their parts, but their eyes kept darting to the door, hoping Abigail would return. Abigail, meanwhile, tracked Amos's middleman to a boarding house on Coldwater's main street. The man, a weasel-faced broker named Hargrove, sat counting coins, his ledger open. Abigail approached, her voice low but firm. "I want to buy out Amos Crane's deal. Name your price." Hargrove smirked, his eyes raking over her. "More than you have, woman. Those girls are spoken for." Abigail's hand tightened on her satchel, her savings inside. "Try me," she said, her tone cold as the prairie wind. Hargrove leaned back, considering. He named a sum, high, but not impossible. Abigail's heart sank. It was nearly all she had. But she thought of Eliza's defiance, Mary's quiet strength, Clara's doll. She nodded. "Meet me tomorrow. I will have it." As she left, the wind howled louder, as if the prairie itself sensed the fight ahead. The wind screamed through cold water that night, rattling the boarding-house windows as Abigail Harrow counted her coins by lamplight. Her savings, hard-earned from years of mending clothes and hauling goods, lay in a small pile, barely enough to meet Hargrove's price. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She thought of the sisters, their faces etched in her mind. Eliza's fire, Mary's quiet resolve, Clara's small hand clutching that doll. Abigail had lost her own family, but these girls, she would fight for them. At the Crane cabin, the air was thick with dread. Eliza stood by the window, watching the dark for any sign of Abigail. Amos snored at the table, the whiskey bottle empty, his face slack with oblivion. Mary sat with Clara on their shared pallet, reading softly from the Bible, her voice a thin thread of comfort. "The Lord is my shepherd," she whispered, but her eyes kept darting to Eliza, seeking reassurance. Clara hugged her doll, its button eyes catching the fire's glow. "Will Abigail come back, Liza?" she asked, her voice small. Eliza forced a nod. "She will," she promised. Dawn broke, gray and heavy, the prairie cloaked in mist. Abigail met Hargrove in the alley behind the saloon, her satchel clutched tight. The weasel-faced man eyed her, his smirk sharp as a blade. "You have the money?" he asked, leaning against a barrel. Abigail nodded, handing over the coins, each one a piece of her past. Her husband's old watch, sold. Her daughter's locket, pawned. Years of labor, gone. Hargrove counted slowly, savoring her tension. "This will do," he said at last. "Crane's girls are yours, but you will need to tell him yourself." Abigail's heart pounded as she walked to the Crane cabin, the wind biting at her heels. She knocked, and Eliza opened the door, her eyes wide with hope and fear. "Is it done?" she whispered. Abigail nodded, stepping inside. The sisters gathered close, Clara clinging to Mary's skirt. Amos stirred, his eyes bleary, confusion hardening into anger as he saw Abigail. "Who are you?" he growled, rising unsteadily. "I am Abigail Harrow," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "I paid Hargrove. Your daughters are free. They stay with me." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Amos's face twisted, his hands clenching. "You have no right," he spat. "They are mine to give." Eliza stepped forward, her voice steady. "We are not property, Father. We choose to go with her." The room crackled with tension, the fire spitting like an echo of Amos's rage. He lunged toward Eliza, his hand raised, but Abigail stepped between them, her eyes blazing. "Touch her, and you will regret it," she said, her voice low, carrying the weight of her own losses. Amos froze, his breath ragged. He saw something. In Abigail's face, grief, fury, a mother's ghost, and faltered. "Take them," he muttered, collapsing back into his chair. "They are nothing but trouble." Eliza's breath caught, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Mary hugged Clara, who buried her face in her doll, trembling. Abigail turned to them, her voice softening. "Gather your things. We leave now." The sisters moved quickly, grabbing their few belongings, a shawl, a Bible, Clara's doll. Eliza paused, looking at Amos, searching for a flicker of the father he once was. She found nothing but a hollow man, staring into the fire. Outside, the wind howled, the mist swirling like spirits. Abigail's wagon waited, Juniper stamping impatiently. The sisters climbed in, their faces pale but resolute. As they rolled away from the cabin, Eliza looked back, the sagging roof fading into the fog. She felt a weight lift, but another settle. A new life, uncertain, with a woman they barely knew. Mary held Clara's hand, whispering, "It will be all right." Clara nodded, her doll pressed close. Hargrove, meanwhile, slunk to the saloon, coins jingling in his pocket. He bragged to the barkeep, thinking the deal done. But the men Amos had promised his daughters to, hard men from distant towns, would not take kindly to this change. Word would spread, and trouble would follow. Abigail knew this as she guided the wagon west, toward a homestead she had heard of, abandoned but livable, near a river where willows grew. She glanced at the sisters, their faces lit by the weak morning light. "We will make a home," she said, her voice firm. "Together." The wagon creaked on, the prairie vast and unforgiving. Eliza watched Abigail, seeing the lines of pain etched in her face, the strength beneath. Mary hummed softly, a hymn to steady her heart. Clara leaned against her, whispering to her doll, "We are safe now." But the road ahead was long, and the shadow of Amos's betrayal lingered, a ghost that would not rest easy. The wagon rattled along the rutted trail, the Nebraska prairie stretching endless under a sky heavy with clouds. Abigail Harrow gripped the reins, her eyes fixed on the horizon where willows marked the river she sought. The abandoned homestead was a day's journey yet, a place of whispered promise, shelter, land, a chance to start anew. Beside her, Eliza sat tall, her sharp eyes scanning the distance, while Mary and Clara huddled in the wagon's bed, wrapped in a quilt against the biting wind. Clara's doll lay nestled between them, its button eyes catching the dim light. The sisters were quiet, the weight of their escape settling like dust. Eliza stole glances at Abigail, trying to read the woman who had upended their fate. Abigail's face was a map of hard years, lines carved by loss, yet softened by something fierce, something maternal. "Why do this for us?" Eliza asked, her voice low, almost lost in the creak of the wheels. Abigail kept her eyes forward, the wind tugging at her bonnet. "Because I could not save my own," she said. "My daughter, my home, they are gone. But you three are here. That is enough." Mary listened, her fingers tracing the Bible's worn cover. She wanted to ask about Abigail's daughter, to know her name, but the words stuck. Instead, she squeezed Clara's hand, feeling the younger girl's warmth anchor her. Clara whispered to her doll, "We will have a house soon, Daisy." The name, spoken so softly, made Mary smile, a small light in the gray day. The homestead came into view. At dusk, a sagging cabin beside a sluggish river, its banks lined with willows that swayed like mourners. The place was rough, broken shutters, a roof half-caved, but Abigail saw potential in its bones. She halted Juniper, the horse snorting as if relieved. "This is it," she said, climbing down. The sisters followed, their steps hesitant on the uneven ground. Eliza tested the door, which groaned open, revealing a dusty room with a stone hearth. "It needs work," she said, her voice steady. "We can do that." They set to it, driven by a shared need to claim this place. Abigail swept out dirt, her hands steady despite the ache in her arms. Eliza hauled broken boards, her strength surprising for her slight frame. Mary and Clara gathered kindling, Clara giggling when a stick snapped too loud. The work was hard, but it wove them together, each task a thread in a new tapestry. By nightfall, they had a fire going, its warmth pushing back the chill. They ate meager rations, hardtack and dried apples, but it felt like a feast, shared in their own space. Days turned to weeks, the homestead slowly transforming. Abigail taught the sisters skills she had learned in her wandering years, mending roofs, planting seeds, tending juniper. Eliza took to it fiercely, her hands learning the rhythm of hammer and nail. Mary found solace in the garden, coaxing life from stubborn soil. Clara, ever with her doll, began to sing, her voice a fragile gift that filled the cabin. Abigail watched them, her heart swelling, though fear lingered. The men Amos had promised his daughters to, hard men, greedy men, would not let go so easily. One morning, as frost sparkled on the willows, hoofbeats echoed down the trail. Eliza spotted them first, 3 riders, their faces shadowed by hats. "Abigail," she called, her voice tight. Abigail stepped outside, her hand on the knife at her belt. The sisters gathered behind her, Mary clutching the Bible, Clara hiding, her doll. The lead rider, a gaunt man with eyes like flint, dismounted. "Crane's girls," he said, his voice cold. "We paid for them. Hargrove says you stole what is ours." Abigail stood firm, her voice cutting through the wind. "They belong to no one. They are with me now." The man sneered, stepping closer, but Eliza raised a pitchfork, her eyes blazing. "Leave," she said, and Mary echoed her, soft but unyielding. Clara peeked out, her small voice clear. "We have a home now." The riders hesitated, sensing the steel in these women, the family they had become. The gaunt man spat, his gaze lingering, but he saw no weakness. "This is not over," he said, mounting his horse. The riders left, their hoofbeats fading into the prairie's hum. Abigail turned to the sisters, her face pale but resolute. "We will be ready if they come back," she said. Eliza nodded, her grip tight on the pitchfork. Mary prayed silently, her faith a quiet strength. Clara hugged her doll, whispering, "Daisy says we are brave." The homestead stood stronger each day, its walls a testament to their resilience. Abigail and the sisters built not just a house, but a life, rooted in the love they chose, not the blood that betrayed them. The prairie stretched wide, but within their cabin they were safe, bound by a bond forged in fire and will. Spring crept into the Nebraska prairie, soft as a whisper, the willows by the river budding green against the gray. The homestead, once a husk of broken boards, stood proud now, its roof patched, its walls sturdy under the sisters' and Abigail Harrow's hands. The cabin smelled of fresh bread baked by Mary, whose garden bloomed with carrots and beans. Eliza's hammer no longer rang out daily, but she kept her tools sharp, her eyes sharper, watching the horizon. Clara, now 8, ran through the grass, her doll Daisy swinging, her laughter a melody that warmed the air. Abigail sat on the porch at dusk, her hands idle for once, a rare stillness in her. She watched the sisters, her sisters, she dared to think, move through their evening tasks. Eliza chopped wood, her swing sure, her face no longer pinched with fear. Mary knelt by the garden, humming a hymn, her freckles catching the fading light. Clara chased a firefly, giggling as it danced away. The prairie stretched vast, but here, in this small circle of home, Abigail felt a peace she had not known since her own daughter's laughter filled a different house, long ago. The threat of the riders lingered, a shadow at the edge of their days. Eliza had taken to sleeping with the pitchfork nearby, her defiance a fire that never dimmed. Mary prayed each night, her Bible open, asking for protection, but also giving thanks for this new life. Clara, too young to fully grasp the danger, sensed the strength around her and grew bolder, her songs louder. Abigail taught them to watch, to listen, to trust the prairie's whispers. the creak of a distant hoof, the shift in the wind. They were a family now, bound not by blood but by choice, each scar and hope shared. One evening, as the sky burned red, a letter arrived, carried by a nervous boy from Coldwater. It was from Amos Crane, his handwriting jagged, stained with regret. He wrote of leaving town, of debts unpaid, of a life unraveling. "I did wrong," he scrawled. "Tell them I am sorry." Eliza read it first, her jaw tight, then passed it to Abigail. "He does not get to say that," she said, her voice low. "Not after what he did." Abigail nodded, folding the letter away. "He does not deserve your forgiveness," she said, "but you deserve to let him go." Mary took the letter next, her eyes tracing the words. She said nothing, but later, by the fire, she prayed for Amos, her voice soft but steady. Clara, curious, asked, "Is Father coming here?" Eliza shook her head, kneeling to meet her sister's gaze. "He is not our home any more, Clara. This is." Clara nodded, clutching Daisy, her small face serious. "I like this home better," she said, and Abigail's heart ached with a love, so fierce it felt like pain. The riders never returned, though word reached the homestead that they had moved on, chasing other deals, other lives. Hargrove, the weasel-faced broker, had vanished too, his coins spent, his schemes unraveled. The prairie had a way of swallowing such men, leaving only dust and stories. Abigail and the sisters let the fear fade, like a bruise healing slow. They built instead, more than a cabin, more than a garden. They built trust, laughter, the kind of love that grows in cracked places. One night, under a sky thick with stars, Abigail sat with the sisters by the fire, the river's murmur a soft backdrop. Eliza spoke of learning to read the stars, her voice eager, dreaming of guiding others someday. Mary shared her hope to plant flowers, not just food, to make beauty for its own sake. Clara, sleepy, leaned against Abigail, whispering, "Daisy says you are our mother now." Abigail's breath caught, her eyes stinging. She touched Clara's hair, then Mary's hand, then Eliza's shoulder. "I am yours," she said, her voice breaking, "and you are mine." The homestead stood as a beacon, its light spilling. From windows they had mended together. Coldwater folk began to visit, drawn by tales of the woman and 3 girls who turned a ruin into a home. They brought seeds, tools, stories, and the sisters welcomed them, their laughter mingling with the wind. Abigail saw her own daughter in their faces sometimes, but the grief was softer now, woven into the love she carried for these girls. Years later, when Eliza was a woman, fierce and wise, when Mary's garden bloomed with roses, when Clara sang. To her own children, the homestead remained. Its walls held their story: betrayal, rescue, resilience. Abigail grew old there, her hair silver, her eyes still stormy but warm. The sisters never forgot Amos's betrayal, but it was a distant ache, overshadowed by the life they built. The prairie, vast and unforgiving, had given them this: a family chosen, a love earned, a home that stood against the wind.